every step of the way, there could have been American intervention to implement a manageable peace. And the reason why they looked in the other direction is because it was, one, in Africa, and two, they would much rather turn a blind eye to this so that their regional ally could gain a stronger foothold over the country. We are moving our attention over to Sudan. The humanitarian catastrophe that many warned would happen after approximately 500 days of blockade. The RSF, Rapid Support Forces, overtook the remaining Security Council in this major city, and from what I understand, the bloodshed was so significant that you can see the blood stains from the satellite. For those of you who don't know, of course, the United Arab Emirates, I've talked about this already, but the United Arab Emirates is the primary partner of the Rapid Support Forces and is largely responsible for the metric ton of violence. And the reason as to why they're doing it is because they extract all of the gold. They are basically the entry point for the extracted Sudanese gold to enter the global marketplace by way of Dubai, then to Switzerland, then to, I don't know, wherever people purchase gold. Yeah. Reminder that a very senior Biden official told a journalist in April 2024 that the entire U.S. policy on Sudan was about keeping the Emiratis on side with Israel and on side against Iran. I remember being in a room last April with a very senior member of the U.S. administration in D.C., and he said to me, Joshua, you have made a category error. You think Sudan is in Africa. Sudan is not in Africa, my friend. Sudan is in the Gulf. When we go see the Emiratis, what number on our to-do list do you think Sudan is? It is not on our to-do list. What we have to do is keep the Emiratis on side with Israel and on side against Iran. The concessions that the Biden administration gave to the Gulf nation states and still failed spectacularly were so insane. I cannot believe how unimaginably incompetent and pro-Israel these delusional losers were. Like, the very fact that this charlatan, Donald Trump, and his stupid, mentally stunted son-in-law have been able to actually communicate the language that these Gulf oilers understand far better than these Yale graduates that spent their entire lives working for the American State Department with a clear, grand design for the region is mind-boggling. Okay, this doesn't mean that Jared Kushner and Donald Trump are brilliant. Okay, I'm not saying that at all. But the very fact that they can just speak the language of the Gulf regional actors and regional leaders and just basically create these like pay-for-play schemes where these guys will be much more amicable to them, as opposed to Joe Biden and Anthony Blinken, is nutty. It is crazy that the financial incentive of corrupt autocrats is a better motivator to end, at least for the time being, some of the worst impacts of this unlimited bloodshed that Israel has enacted than the Joe Biden administration ever did. Just remember that. And yes, British arms are being used by the RSF as well. And so have Israeli arms, by the way. But now that the genocide and the ethnic cleansing campaigns have reached yet another major city, all of a sudden, like clockwork, you see a bunch of Democratic politicians and even some Republicans, I believe the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, come out to be like, well, we really got to punish the RSF. Okay, it's not just about punishing the RSF, however. You have to punish the United Arab Emirates. Will you punish the United Arab Emirates? I don't think so. The UAE is the primary entry point. The UAE is the primary entry point for the Sudanese gold that is stolen and extracted to enter the global marketplace. And in exchange for said gold, they offer weapons. And on top of that, they offer some political cover. Are all the countries in the Abraham Accords just enabling genocide? Yes. Yes. What's interesting is that Sudan is always cynically used by Israel defenders in whataboutism fashion, but it's Israel's biggest critics in Congress who also speak most passionately and regularly about Sudan, Ilhan and now Rashida. Where are the Israel defenders in Congress? I am horrified at the RSF's mass killings of civilians in Al-Fashir, Sudan. We must do everything in our power to stop this genocide, including cutting off all weapon sales to the United Arab Emirates, who are arming and funding this ethnic cleansing. Good luck getting Donald Trump to speak on this. He loves the Gulf. Yeah. Ilhan Omar, who wants to hold UAE accountable to pressure them to rein in the support of Sudanese militias. Surely Israel and AIPAC will join her in this. They were so sincerely concerned about the Sudanese people. Sudan is facing the world's worst humanitarian crisis and a genocide. Tens of thousands dead, 12 million displaced. The images of the RSF seizing Al-Fashir are horrific. The UAE and other arms dealers to the RSF and RSF-aligned militias must be held accountable. Every single person that constantly chirped and used the plight of the Sudanese as a simple talking point or a simple distraction away from America's direct involvement in Gaza are now noticeably quiet. They're absent from the conversation. It's weird. It almost feels like they never actually cared about Sudan at all, and they simply wanted to use it as a distraction. Where are they at? Because a lot of people made hay and yelled at me for not sufficiently covering Sudan, even though I had extended some coverage to Sudan, of course, not to the same daily coverage with Gaza, and that is something that I readily admit, okay? But I had covered Sudan, and yet it was a major point of contention all around TikTok. There was more coverage over my perceived lack of coverage over Sudan than the actual coverage of Sudan. What's the point of trying to make some drama about that instead of focusing? Because the point I'm trying to make is that none of these people were being sincere. Everyone was using the plight of the people in Sudan as a simple talking point, a bad faith talking point to drive home whatever your argument is. That's it. Not everything is drama. My point is, sometimes bad faith, cynical actors will absolutely weaponize the plight of other people, as they did in this case, over and over and over again. Part of the reason why they're quiet is the same reason why the reason why they're quiet is because they knew that it was just a talking point and that's it and nothing else. The reason why they knew it was just a talking point for them was because the ally responsible for the violence in Sudan is an ally to Israel. Something that I brought up all the time whenever people would be like, oh, you talk about Gaza, why not Sudan? You don't care about Sudan. What did I always say? What did I always say? It's like talking about Yemen. Oh, why aren't you covering Yemen? It's like, okay, I do talk about Yemen. And guess what? Once again, that's another ally to Israel that's doing that. It was sometimes also the UAE. Up. The UAE is a formative ally of Israel. Okay? Just remember that. And they're also one of the more evil countries in the Gulf. It's like between them and Saudi Arabia, I don't know. Sometimes it's Saudi Arabia, sometimes it's the UAE. Talk about Sudan. This whole argument is pointless. You didn't cover Sudan enough, but you're also not black. Makes sense. If it was a big talking point for yourself or your community, you aren't familiar, but drop this whole... What is happening, man? Please just stop. I'm going to stop reading stuff like this while I'm in the midst of covering the humanitarian catastrophe that is taking place in Sudan.
I believe that thousands
be like, oh, dude, you just want to do drama. Meanwhile, you're the one who's trying to do drama. Shut up.
People are currently being killed by the rapid support forces in Al-Fashir, with bloodstains and dead bodies even being seen from space. Doctors, journalists, and first responders are currently being held captive by the RSF, all in a telecommunications blackout. This is the humanitarian catastrophe that many warned would happen.
Can you explain the RSF's reasons for genociding people? Is it ethnic-based or land-based? It's both. Ethnic-based sectarian conflict is oftentimes still done specifically for land acquisition, territorial expansion, and primarily the extraction of natural resources from the land, in this case, gold. Okay? Gold and oil, but in this case, primarily gold. But what motivates people to engage in this incredible act of violence is never just going to be, oh yeah, we'll go and we'll take the gold, go kill every single person. You need a different motivator. You need a different motivation for it. So larger powers or regional powers will oftentimes utilize the pre-existing ethnic tensions in an effort to tilt their hand or tilt the balance and put their hand on the scales. It's not the primary reason, but it is usually what motivates a lot of people to do this kind of violence. Wrong, wrong, wrong. What do you mean? What? The Sudanese army made them that way. I have family in Bar. The RSF are literally slaughtering as well. They killed Red Cross workers, lining up people and executing them. There's a network blackout. We can't reach family. The UAE has RSF mercenaries in Yemen. No, I know. Wait, what are you saying is wrong? No, the primary purpose, the primary goal is always resource extraction and territorial acquisition. That's what it is. But they will use pre-existing animosity to motivate people to do ultra violence in the way that you're seeing the RSF engage in. I'm saying that the most consequent, there's a couple different reasons why they're doing this. Obviously, a part of it is the ports, right? They want to have control over the Red Sea on either side. That's a major concern because it's a huge trade route. Okay. Another reason, perhaps even more consequentially, is resource extraction. But it's kind of like this. I'm saying that the Sudanese government and army has long funded and backed these groups to quell uprisings from African minorities. I'm confused by what you're trying to tell me. My point is, it's never just sectarian tensions or ethnic conflict that is the primary vehicle for the violence or the primary purpose for the violence. The primary purpose for the violence is always material. But ethnic tensions, in whichever direction, is usually the motivator to get more people on to get more people motivated to engage in acts of violence. Did this with the Misriya Arabs in South Sudan and the Janjaweed? Yes. No, absolutely. Johnny Harris did a video explaining how this conflict came to be. I can't believe we're doing this, but we're going to watch Johnny Harris.
War as violence rises in the capital. Two rival generals and their armies are fighting for control in the city of Khartoum, and the battle is spreading across the country.
$3 billion in aid is needed to help Sudan's refugee crisis. Around 1 million people have been displaced after intense fighting broke out a month ago.
So let me get you...
I don't know if I trust CIA Harris on this topic. You kind of can, because America's involvement in this is always going to be there, obviously. Its involvement is indirect by way of the UAE. And their adversaries are also playing a formative role in one side of the conflict, Russia. But it's one of the few like regional conflicts where the American involvement is not so direct that they can take a hardline position. Against the people that are destroying the Sudanese population. That's precisely the reason why. I don't know if it was no shot. They're going to eat your ass for this. What do you mean? The American government has called what the RSF is doing in Sudan a genocide. That doesn't mean that America's on the right side or has no interest in this conflict whatsoever. But it goes to show, like, there is always going to be an indirect level of involvement. But if you're confused by why so many politicians are coming out to say, like, what the RSF is doing is ethnic cleansing, they need to stop. They need to stop doing this. The reason why they're saying that, as opposed to saying it in Israel, for example, is because of the indirect involvement that they have, where they can just, like, burn it. There is no major lobby, for example, that's, like, shutting them the up. All right, we'll do Cogito. Cogito is only a year old,
this
as
video
opposed to the
is
Johnny
sponsored
Harris
by
one that's 2
Nebula.
years old.
Support. Once the home of 6 million people, now a constant barrage of artillery and airstrikes punctuate daily life. At least 3 million people have fled the city. Khartoum has become a ghost town. Even on Google Earth, you can see what were once busy, car-filled streets are now empty.
Yeah, for the record, there is nothing that happens on this planet that America has no involvement in, okay? Nothing. You look hard enough at any conflict that's happening around the world, of course the global hegemonic superpower is going to have some degree of involvement in. I'm just saying that it is not as directly involved as a direct belligerent, even in the way that Russia is, okay? That's all I'm stating. America is behind all of the evil around the world to a certain degree. Even in this situation, they are behind the UAE, for example. And the UAE is the primary backer of the RSF. So, of course, America still has an indirect involvement, just like with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which the RSF forces actually contributed to in the civil war in Yemen. It was the UAE on one side, the Saudis on the other side, against the Ansar Allah movement that was backed by Iran. In that circumstance, it was American weapons and American munitions and American guidance systems that were responsible for all the violence, but it was an indirect involvement. But it's not as direct as our involvement in Israel.
War broke out in the capital on the 15th of April 2023 between the Sudanese
Okay, facts. America has no involvement with Sentinel Island. There you go.
Armed Forces, or SAF, commanded by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the paramilitary group known as the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, commanded by General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, widely known as Hemeti. This power struggle has caused the world's largest humanitarian catastrophe. International observers are sounding the alarm for genocide. 8.6 million people have been forced from their homes. 2 million have fled the country, many to neighbouring Chad and Egypt. This is the largest displaced population in the world. 25 million people, including 14 million children, are in need of immediate humanitarian aid. 18 million are facing severe hunger, the equivalent of the entire population of the Netherlands. 755,000 people are in famine conditions, meaning Sudan has now passed Gaza as the worst famine on earth. 2.5 million people are set to starve by September. The strange thing is that all this started out as an inspiring story of success. In 2019, a massive, peaceful, democratic revolution ousted former Sudanese dictator Omar al-Bashir after 30 years of repressive rule. Sudanese men and women went into the streets and demanded their rights and won. Then, two generals smothered Sudan's democratic revolution and have now turned on each other. A civil war has broken out in Sudan. Famine is looming, a genocide is underway in Darfur, all while the international community turns a blind eye or is directly profiting from the conflict. Sudan is collapsing, and here's why.
30 years of iron-fisted rule under Omar al-Bashir ended today.
Sudan is home to about 48 million people and around 500 different ethnic groups. It is 97% Sunni Muslim and Arabic is the main language. About 70% of the population are Sudanese Arabs, with significant minorities like Fur, Zaghawa and Masalit people. Sudan's history is thousands of years long, but we'll be starting in 1899 when this area was conquered by the British Empire, who then ruled Sudan as a colony until 1956. After independence, this new, massive Sudan faced huge challenges. The colonial borders the British drew forced very different peoples into one state. There was a divide between the country's wealthier Arab Muslim north and the less developed non-Arab Christian or animist south, which caused decades of civil wars, ending with Sudan splitting into two states when South Sudan broke off in 2011. In 1989, the military officer Omar al-Bashir seized power in a coup. Backed by the Sudanese armed forces, he ruled for the next 30 years. Since independence, Arab elites and military men in the Nile River Valley have dominated the Sudan.
This is key. One of the many reasons why there's so much conflict. Okay, controlling the Sudanese ports.
State, prioritizing development in cities like Khartoum, while neglecting peripheral regions like Blue Nile, South Kordofan and Darfur. Subsidies for fuel and wheat for the cities are financed by exporting livestock.
This is not a conflict that can fit into a pro or anti-Western framework. Egypt and Saudi support the SAF, and Egypt is the second largest recipient of military aid after Israel. Conversely, that camp includes Iran and RSF as Chinese weaponry. No, that's why I said, like, America can get away with saying that this is a genocide that's going on. That's what I mean. It doesn't mean that America's hands are not in this. Of course, they are involved. But it's not as direct. That's simply the point I was making. You feel me? I would even go so far as to like present the shit show that has been the Syrian civil war, where America basically was funding virtually every side, not all sides, but pretty much all the sides, even sides that were warring with one another, like the Turks. Turkey is America's NATO proxy. Turkey had the Free Syrian Army that were getting training from the Americans by way of Turkish training, getting weapons from the Americans by way of the Turkish government. Meanwhile, on the other side, America, the American State Department, was directly involved in the training of the Kurdish militias, the YPJ. And they would fight one another. They would bomb one another's positions sometimes. The Turkish government was sometimes directly involved itself in wiping out the Kurds. In this circumstance, America's involvement is not as direct, even in comparison to the shit show that became the Syrian civil war.
Gum Arabic, oil and gold from these peripheral regions. This system has left areas like Darfur, home to 11 million people and roughly the size of Spain, incredibly poor. Darfur was for centuries a wealthy Islamic sultanate until it was conquered by the British in 1916. Its unique identity predates the creation of Sudan, and the Arab elite centre has exploited and looked down on the African and Arab populations in Darfur. Darfur's history is multi-ethnic and identity there is very mixed, but generally in Darfur, Arab refers to Arabized indigenous Africans who live as nomadic camel or cattle herders. African generally applies to farmers. Both groups are black and Muslim and have intermarried for centuries. In the 90s, one Darfuri said, "We didn't think who is an Arab and who is a Masalit. We just thought that we were the same people." From the 80s onward, drought and desertification in Chad and Darfur forced nomadic Arabs to seek new water and grazing areas, causing conflict with settled farmers. Both sides correctly felt that the state was neglecting them. In 2001, Zagawa, Fur and Masalit rebel groups, unhappy with Bashir's rule and Darfur's neglect, launched a rebellion. By 2003, they were seizing towns and humiliating the Sudanese army, who were already busy fighting another civil war in the south. Omar al-Bashir's regime needed Darfur's resources. The rebels mostly recruited from the non-Arab population of Darfur, so al-Bashir targeted those groups with extreme violence. Al-Bashir needed an alternative to his struggling military, so he reinforced the ethnic lines of the conflict by paying and arming Darfuri Arabs. In return for steady employment, these men, armed with invaluable local knowledge, formed rapid horse-riding militias. These brutally effective fighters became known as the Janjaweed, or the Devils on Horseback. The Janjaweed systematically attacked non-Arab communities, primarily the Masalit, Fur and Zagawa, but also some of the non-involved Arab communities. While claiming that they were fighting rebels, the Janjaweed burned down entire villages. They systematically killed men and boys, they targeted women for rape, and they forced 3 million people from their homes.
Sudan's vast refugee camps are swelling once more and its death toll is rising.
Many ended up in camps for internally displaced persons or IDPs around cities such as Nyala, El Fasher and El Janina. By 2007, al-Bashir and the Janjaweed killed at least 300,000 people. In 2009, al-Bashir was indicted by the International Criminal Court for genocide in Darfur, but neither he nor the Janjaweed ever faced punishment for their crimes. After decades of repressive rule, al-Bashir needed to coup-proof his regime. The Sudanese armed forces had overthrown the government 3 times since 1956. To avoid this fate, he built a paramilitary to counterbalance the SAF. In 2013, he consolidated the Janjaweed militias into a single force under his direct control, called the Rapid Support Forces. This new, highly mobile force could rapidly deploy to suppress any resistance to al-Bashir. Since 2013, the RSF has continued the Janjaweed's crimes in Darfur, destroying hundreds of villages with impunity. Hemeti is an Arab from Darfur, and he fought in the Darfur conflict and rose up to become a senior Janjaweed leader. He displayed exceptional loyalty to al-Bashir, who made him the leader of the RSF. The RSF crushed any resistance to an increasingly hated al-Bashir so efficiently that al-Bashir called Hemeti my protector. Hemeti had larger ambitions though. Sudan is the 3rd largest producer of gold in Africa, the world's most gold-rich continent. At the same time, Sudan remains one of the poorest countries in the world because the gold mined by the hard work of the Sudanese people has never enriched the Sudanese people, but it did enrich Hemeti. In November of 2017, Hemeti's RSF seized the Jebel Amir gold mines in Darfur from anti-al-Bashir rebels. Hemeti now controlled gold mines worth billions of dollars. 99% of Sudan's gold is exported to the United Arab Emirates or UAE, who refine it and then sell it on the international market, making the Emirates and Hemeti filthy rich. The Al Gunade company, run by Hemeti's family, has become a vast conglomerate covering gold, transport and construction. But the UAE and Hemeti's relationship went well beyond just gold. In 2015, the UAE struck a deal with Hemeti to send RSF soldiers to fight in the Saudi Emirati war on the Houthis in Yemen. The RSF mercenaries were paid $13,000 for each 6 months of fighting. A Sudanese doctor working overtime might earn about $500 a month. For impoverished Darfuris, fighting in the RSF became one of the only reliable sources of income. By 2017, there were as many as 40,000 RSF troops in Yemen. 20 to 40% of them were between the ages of 14 and 17 years old. This was a great deal for everyone. The UAE and the Saudis got to kill Yemenis without actually fighting, Hemeti got rich, and impoverished Darfuri 16-year-olds died fighting equally young Yemenis. The Saudi and the United Arab Emirates' ongoing war on Yemen has killed about 400,000 people.
No, they weren't aligned with the Houthis. No, they were fighting against the Houthis at the direction of the UAE.
By late 2018, Hemeti was one of the richest men in Africa. He had built up an independent, battle-hardened military force of over 100,000
yeah, you'll see here, it'll
men
describe it.
and 10,000 armed trucks alongside alliances in the rich Gulf states. This wasn't just a paramilitary anymore. It was a private army and business empire, a state within a state. And Hemeti had built his power base just in time. During an economic crisis in 2018, al-Bashir cut wheat and fuel subsidies, which tripled food prices. In December 2018, protests sprang up around the country demanding food security for all citizens. It quickly turned into a nationwide uprising against al-Bashir's 30 long years of repressive rule. The whole country is Darfur became a slogan repeated over and over again in protests across Sudan, a show of solidarity for Darfur, whose suffering had been ignored for decades. This revolution was being led by groups called resistance committees, grassroots, civilian-led groups that organised neighbourhoods to wage civil disobedience campaigns against the government. Dozens of protesters were gunned down by the state, but thousands of young women and men in the resistance committees kept making their demands. The resignation of al-Bashir, the end of military rule, a transition to democratic civilian government, and the prosecution of war criminals, including al-Bashir. On the 6th of April 2019, the protesters gathered outside the military headquarters and presidential palace in Khartoum to build a protest encampment. Images of the protester Alaa Salah leading chants went viral. Trade unions and resistance committees brought the country to a standstill. The noose was tightening around Bashir. Hemeti, Bashir's protector, joined with the military in a coup, and on the 11th of April 2019, the military placed al-Bashir under house arrest, ending 3 decades of his rule. The Sudanese revolution was a sudden success story. A democratic movement by the people ousted one of the world's worst dictators. The problem was that the military took over. The new government would be a transitional military council led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who took over as de facto head of state, with Hemeti as his deputy. The protesters refused to leave the streets. They demanded the RSF be dissolved, the army go back to the barracks, and the government be handed over to civilians. For the military and the RSF, this threatened their power and business interests. Al-Bashir was disposable, but the system wasn't. Al-Burhan and Hemeti began to crack down on the protests. In the early morning on the 3rd of June 2019, the RSF entered the protest encampment in Khartoum, surrounding the sleeping protesters.
What was planned as a night of culture and conversation became one of bloodshed and terror.
Chaos has broken out at the sit-in. I'm told that earlier rapid support forces, a paramilitary group now part of the armed forces, fired live ammunition up, beat them severely.
These people, we don't know if they were the RSF or not, entered Nile Street to try and clear the barricades. They fired live ammunition and there were loads of casualties. I saw 5 dead in front of me and transferred no less than 30 to hospital.
Chad said this is slowly happening in Pakistan as well? Yes.
They unleashed a massacre. They burned people alive in tents and murdered and raped their way through the campsite. At least 130 protesters were killed, bringing the peaceful sit-in to a brutal end after 58 days. Eyewitnesses said the RSF fighters yelled, "You used to chant the whole country is Darfur, now we have brought Darfur to you." The democratic movement did not give in though. They remained in the streets. Negotiations led to a power-sharing agreement with a transitional government with al-Burhan as Sudan's de facto head of state, Hemeti as his deputy, and the civilians were represented by Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok. For months and months, civilian groups tried to negotiate a transition from military rule to full civilian rule, with a new constitution and elections in 2022. The problem was that the democratic transition was doomed from the beginning. In order for Sudan to become a democracy, it would have to separate the military from control of the economy and the state, which the military and Hemeti were obviously against. The trouble was that the military and Hemeti were the people with guns. The Sudanese people also wanted war criminals brought to justice. If they gave up their power, the generals would end up in court for their crimes in Darfur or the June 3rd massacre. And finally, the civilians wanted the RSF gone. Sick of negotiating with civilians, al-Burhan and Hemeti teamed up on the 25th of October 2021 to perform a military coup. They dissolved the civilian part of the government and arrested Hamdok. The coup wasn't received well. Protests erupted across
Every step of the way, there could have been American intervention to implement a manageable peace. And the reason why they looked in the other direction is because it was, one, in Africa, and two, they did not want to pick up the bag. No, it wasn't just COVID. They just didn't want to. They didn't want to pick up the bag for the United Arab Emirates and the Trump administration beforehand as well.
Across the country and were violently put down week after week, but the protests did continuously push al-Burhan and Hemeti back to the negotiating table, as both wanted some sort of agreement with the civilians to legitimize their rule, but they wanted an agreement that left only them with the power and the guns. Negotiations after the October coup continuously froze over one issue: how to integrate the RSF into the Sudanese military.
There was no resource to exploit? No, there are. There's gold and oil. Well, most of the oil is in South Sudan, but there is gold. It's just not a commodity or a resource that they particularly care about that much. And also, they would much rather turn a blind eye to this so that their regional ally could gain a stronger foothold over the country.
Can't have two armies. Al-Burhan wanted the RSF to merge into the SAF within 2 years. Hemeti wanted a decade. From Hemeti's point of view, why would he give up his powerful paramilitary? The moment he does, he loses all leverage, and then Al-Burhan can eliminate him.
I think you can go so far as to say that you can tell that this wasn't like American NGO-backed civil society organizations that were actually causing a ruckus in making demands for a democratic organization of Sudanese society. Because if that was the case, because that's usually the American footprint, a color revolution of sorts, that's when America does intervene. But when it's actually the democratic wishes of the majority, like a true democratic wish of the majority, as opposed to a regional actor's resource extraction scheme, then they just don't give a shit. They don't talk about it. The media doesn't cover it as much. And that's how it goes.
If you're Al-Burhan, your incentive is to eliminate Hemeti as soon as possible. The longer you wait, the more powerful he gets. They smothered Sudan's potential democracy together, but now the two generals, one a brutal paramilitary leader from Sudan's most marginalized area, the other a career general representing the ruling class at Sudan's center, now faced off as it became clear that if they could eliminate the other, they could win the whole country for themselves. On the 15th of April 2023, the RSF launched a series of simultaneous attacks on SAF bases, on Al-Burhan's residence, and areas around Khartoum International Airport. The RSF also hit Meroe, Al Obeida, Nyala, El Fasher, and Port Sudan. At least 35 people died in the attempt to kill Al-Burhan at his residence. Al-Burhan himself survived. A civil war had begun. Khartoum became a deadly battle zone. People who could afford to fled the city. Millions of others faced daily airstrikes and gun battles as they sheltered in their homes. Hemeti's quick-moving and battle-hardened RSF established control over almost half the country, including Khartoum, forcing Al-Burhan and his generals to flee to Port Sudan. The SAF continues to use its main advantage, its air force, to bomb civilian areas indiscriminately, frequently slaughtering women and children. Both sides are constantly fighting for control of the area around Khartoum, but Darfur has seen the worst violence. Soon after the fighting broke out in
As Yemen's blockade continues to choke Israel's shipping lanes in the Red Sea, new reports reveal that Sudan's Port Sudan has quietly become a key route for Israeli-linked cargo used to circumvent Ansar Allah's blockade on vessels bound for Eilat. Since the start of the genocide in Gaza, Israel and its Gulf partners have relied on Red Sea land corridors and alternative ports, particularly Egypt and Sudan, to sustain trade and energy shipments. Sudan's transnational military government, backed by the UAE and supported by Israel, has allowed foreign vessels to operate under its protection, effectively aiding Israel's war economy while its own people face famine and displacement. What Yemen shut down in defense of Gaza, Sudan's generals have reopened for profit and for political favor. This report, written likely to give legitimacy to the RSF militia, claims that the Sudanese government is backed by the UAE. Also explain to me how an Israeli ship banned from the Red Sea would benefit from using Port Sudan, which is in Africa. Oh, this is this person is saying that the Mint Press is offering legitimacy to the RSF by shitting on the government forces or the other generals' forces, SAF. The problem is both sides are either working alongside Russia or they're working alongside the UAE. I don't think this ends up giving legitimacy to the, I don't think that the SAF is not good either. This entire video plots out exactly what the divisions were. Both are military forces that are dominating the entire population. The RSF is worse But it doesn't matter. It's not that the other side is good either. Neither of them want democracy. Both of them want to rule over the entire country. And there are regional partners like Egypt and even in some instances Russia that are trying to ensure that the RSF doesn't control the country. The UAE wants the RSF to control the country, but from the perspective of the Sudanese population, they want democracy to take place.
Khartoum, the RSF attacked El Janina, home to 540,000 people, what was once the lively capital of West Darfur. From mid-April to mid-June 2023, RSF forces with heavy artillery and gunfire systematically attacked civilians and infrastructure such as hospitals, mosques and schools in El Janina. They targeted the primarily Masalit majority neighbourhoods in El Janina and the internally displaced persons camps surrounding the city. In El Janina, the RSF committed a campaign of systematic rape and enslavement of women in the areas they attacked. In and around El Janina, the RSF went from house to house, killing Masalit or presumed Masalit males of any age.
We met one of the most senior Masalit figures from the region.
100% this is a genocide.
For the record, the reason why I said that ethnic conflict or sectarian tensions are not the primary responsibility here, but simply a galvanizing factor for the forces is for this reason. Because the violence itself can be easily read as sectarian infighting, like a sectarian tension, the Masalit getting ruthlessly slaughtered by, I guess, more Islamist RSF forces that are backed by the UAE. But the reason why that's not the primary factor here, that is just a galvanizing factor, is because the ultimate goal is resource extraction. They are, however, using the pre-existing ethnic tensions to move people in this direction.
Can you put your hand
Yes,
up?
they're using ethnic and tribal divisions they're exploiting ethnic and tribal divisions to do unlimited violence.
If either your father or your brother is either dead or missing.
The siege of El Janina and the massacre killed between 10 and 15,000 people and created 370,000 refugees. You can see the destruction yourself on Google Earth. The Sudanese armed forces did next to nothing to protect El Janina and its civilians. On the 14th of June, Kamas Abakar, the Masalit governor of West Darfur, was sheltering in a UNICEF compound. In an interview with Al Hadat TV, soon after the interview, the governor was captured by the RSF, and hours later, videos of his corpse were shared on Twitter. Abakar's killing triggered a panicked exodus out of El Janina. On the night of the 14th of June, tens of thousands of refugees poured out of the city to make the 30-kilometer trek through the desert to Chad or to the SAF base in Artamata, a few kilometers north. The kilometers-long convoy leading to Artamata was attacked by the RSF at sunrise on the 15th of June. The RSF opened fire on the convoy, massacring the refugees. The RSF forces shot at hundreds of women, men and children who tried to escape by swimming across the rapid Kaja River. 1,000 people were killed during this exodus. Many people from El Janina were killed at RSF checkpoints in the city and on the roads. Women disguised their male children in girls' clothes as they tried to escape El Janina. RSF fighters stopped women with children, checked the child's sex, and if it was male, they killed the child. By the 27th of July, 179,000 new refugees arrived in Adre, a poor border town in Chad. 600,000 Sudanese people are now living as refugees in Chad with little hope of returning home. The RSF are the Janjaweed relabeled. They avoided justice and the international community allowed them to flourish. Now they have 20 more years of experience and upgraded weaponry and are committing genocide again. The RSF has conquered the capital of all 5 Darfur states with the exception...
Sorry, I wanna clarify a previous statement. I misspoke when I said the Islamist forces. The RSF is a secular Arab nationalist, or at least they present themselves as a secular Arab nationalist force rather than an Islamist force.
Exception of Al-Fasher, a city that now stands alone. Its population has ballooned to 1.8 million people, as it houses over 1 million displaced Darfuris. Al-Fasher has been under siege by the RSF since April 2024. The RSF has blocked all roads leading to Al-Fasher. No one is coming to their aid, and the city is being starved to death. Both the RSF and the SAF block aid access to each other's territory. The Sudanese armed forces ordered international aid organisations and the UN not to deliver aid over the Chad border into RSF territory, and the organisations are obeying that order, which means that those under attack in Darfur are alone. In December 2023, the RSF captured Gezira State, Sudan's breadbasket that produces nearly half of the country's wheat. In that state alone, the RSF has looted supplies that could feed millions. Now, 18 million Sudanese are facing acute food insecurity. If the situation does not change, 2.5 million people could die by the end of September. Access in Sudan is so limited that we have no idea how many people have actually died in this war so far. The UN reports that about 14,790 people have died, but we know that around 15,000 people died in El Janina alone. Some experts believe that 150,000 people may already be dead. The Sudanese have been left to fend for themselves in the world's worst humanitarian crisis.
This is also another one of the reasons why it's like more difficult to cover what's going on. The reason why it's more difficult to cover what's going on in Sudan is also because they just straight up, just like Israel, murder every single person that they can get their hands on, including journalists. So the amount of information that you can get out of Sudan is also very limited.
To fight this crisis, Sudanese youth established emergency response rooms, or ERRs, across the country. Born from the resistance committees that led the 2019 revolution, ERR volunteers have evacuated tens of thousands from conflict zones, provided clean water and medicine, and kept the few hospitals still running stocked with fuel and supplies. They maintain water and communication infrastructure and run community kitchens that feed millions. But now, over a year into the war, it's getting harder with no aid coming in. And they're doing all this while both sides of the conflict are targeting them.
You stayed here throughout the war. Were you not afraid?
No, I'm not afraid. Afraid of what?
Afraid of being killed?
Man will kill, will die once, no? Not twice, once.
These emergency response rooms have been keeping Sudan alive by not only saving people, but by keeping the social fabric of Sudan from tearing apart. One ERR volunteer said, "Everybody should be able to eat and not feel shame. We, as Sudanese, are still helping each other. We survive together." The Rapid Support Forces have been winning on almost every front throughout the war, until January 2024, when Iranian-made armed drones helped the SAF halt the progress of the Rapid Support Forces. Iran wants an ally in Africa and on the Red Sea, and has found one in Al Burhan. The drones help pinpoint artillery strikes, which forces the RSF to flee from many areas and allowed the army to deploy forces on the ground. This has
Arab nationalism is led by Nasserism socialists which fought the UAE. RSF are not Arab nationalists. That's why I said they bill themselves as a secular Arab nationalist movement, but they're not. And they do have Islamists amongst their ranks. It's not a normal. I don't know how to describe it. It's not like a Ba'ath Party style situation either. It is simply like one paramilitary group fighting against the previous military junta, while also destroying all other civilian population groups. But they're not like they're not engaging in a pan-Arabic nationalist movement. That's the reason why chatters are pushing back on that, is because that ideology invokes a specific historic pattern.
Allowed the SAF to regain pockets of territory around Khartoum. Whether this actually changes the war or whether it just drags this hell out for civilians is yet to be seen. For years, the Wagner Group, Russia's state-funded private military company, has armed and assisted the RSF in exchange for access to Sudan's gold. Sudan's gold helps Russia avoid the effects of the economic sanctions placed on it after it invaded Ukraine in 2022. Gold is a global hard currency that Russia can use to prop up the ruble. Hemedti was in Moscow with a plane full of gold on the day Russia invaded. On the 5th of June 2019, 2 days after the RSF massacred over 100 protesters in Khartoum, the Wagner-affiliated company Mero Gold, a company with mines in Sudan, supported by the RSF, imported 13 tons of riot shields, helmets and batons to a company owned by Hemedti's family. Shortly after that, Hemedti purchased high-end surveillance and phone hacking equipment from Israeli intelligence, which allows him to crack down on any resistance in Khartoum or near his gold mines. In April 2023, the Wagner Group supplied the RSF with surface-to-air missiles, which have been invaluable in taking out SAF jets. After Wagner's leader died after a short-lived rebellion against Putin, it appears Russia has changed sides, or at least is now supporting both sides. In April 2024, Russia pledged recognition and military support and then began selling gas to Al Burhan and the SAF. And Al Burhan has committed to building a Russian naval base in Port Sudan.
Yeah.
But the major
This is why I said they arm and fund both sides.
player in Sudan's civil war.
Also, this is not unique. I just described to you that America does this shit all over the place as well. This is not unique to Russia. This is what superpowers do. And yes, Russia and Israel are more often than not on the same side when it comes to regional affairs. I know everybody likes to think like, oh, what are you talking about? Russia is like pro-Iran. Russia is pro-Iran. Vladimir Putin has openly stated that Israel is seen as like a sister nation to Russia. It's the third most commonly spoken language in Israel after Hebrew and English is Russian. Israel is also a way for Russian oligarchs to freely enter the global marketplace because a lot of Russian oligarchs also have Israeli passports as well.
Is the United Arab Emirates, who have been using their vast wealth to influence regional politics. The UAE is a rich petrostate and key American ally in the region alongside Saudi Arabia and Egypt, and it hosts about 5,000 American military personnel.
That's also a good example, yes. China literally does this in Myanmar 100%. That's also true. And the difference, of course, is that that's its own border, not to justify it, but they will sometimes offer logistical support and in the interest of stability in a regional partner with the military junta, and then they will also sometimes support the paramilitary formations that are fighting against the military junta. Yeah, you can do this all you want. It's just the truth.
Personnel. Hemedti keeps the gold flowing out of Sudan and into Dubai. Both Hemedti and the UAE and their customers want that gold to keep flowing. In June of 2023, Chad's president met with the UAE's president in Abu Dhabi, and Chad's president left that meeting with $1.5 billion. By the way, Chad's annual GDP is $12 billion. Suddenly, UAE cargo planes began landing in Andajaras, a tiny oasis town close to Chad's border with Sudan. Cargo planes from the Emirates have been landing there on a near daily basis since June 2023. When the records of these flights were publicly leaked, the UAE said that they had just built a 50-bed hospital there to help with the Sudanese refugee crisis, a crisis that's happening 300 kilometers to the south. The UAE called this a new milestone in the UAE's bright record of giving. What was it giving? Well, it wasn't aid. Locals have stated that the hospital is treating wounded RSF fighters. Weapons are flown into this airstrip and then are driven to Zarug, the main RSF base in North Darfur. Hemedti's fighters
UAE was giving
Emirates supplied
weapons to the RSF
anti-tank missiles to target army bases in Khartoum. In February of 2024, A leaked document confirmed that 100 RSF soldiers were flown to the UAE for training on drones and tanks. The UAE, due to its support and arming of the RSF, is complicit in the genocide in Darfur, and any of its allies such as Saudi Arabia and the US who continue to support it are also complicit. The UAE sees Sudan as a useful Red Sea ally and also as a future cheap source of food and mercenaries. The Emirates have also positioned themselves as fighters against Islamism, which they think has influence over the SAF. During the 2011 Arab Spring, the fear of Islamism became a useful tool for Middle Eastern dictators as a way to brutally put down protests against their rule. Sure, they weren't killing democratic protesters, they were fighting Islamists. Promises to fight Islamists have for decades been used to gain Western military aid and immunity for human rights violations. Abdullahi Haleki from Refugees International said, "The UAE has worked more than any other country to stifle the emergence of democracy in the region." Hemeti has noticed that by calling himself a fighter against Islamism, he can win support from the West and Gulf states. He's even paid several Western PR firms millions of dollars to...
It's pretty funny that, like, I mean, it's obviously tragic, but there's a hint of irony here that like these guys just don't give a shit, okay? They don't give a shit. It's not, I don't know how to describe it as far as like whether this is a real war being waged against like fundamentalist forces or not. It doesn't matter. It's not. That's not the case. Especially when you think about like the forces that the Saudi government has utilized in perpetuity around the region and have propped up and a monster that they have fed in Africa as well. Where do you think Al-Qaeda comes from? Like, what was Osama bin Laden doing? He was doing this shit, but in other neighboring African nations. On the Islamist front, the UAE Interior Ministry called the SAF a front for the Muslim Brotherhood as recently as yesterday. Only reason this has any staying powers of the previous al-Bashir regime was the only other Salafist regime besides Saudi Arabia. They use that to claim that the current military is dominated by Salafists. Yeah. Americans are too stupid to understand Shia versus Sunni. No shot. They're going to comprehend the RSF being a secular Arab supremacist anti-Islamist. Absolutely no shot. They're not really secular anti-Islamists either. They're anti-ideological gangsters. They got certain ideas about race that might surprise Americans. Like it is a marketing technique. Honestly, dude, I think most dumb people are not even aware of Africa and Islam. Oh my God. America's number one weapon it wields in Africa is the exact same shit that they did in the rest of the MENA region in the Middle East, which is ISIS-style forces that literally wreak havoc, only for America to then set up a military base to combat ISIS-style influence in the region. How did those guys get there? How did they get the weapons? How are they dominating all of these other nations on the verge of instability? I wonder. Only to then have to bring in an American military base so they can engage in some sort of stabilization operation.
Market him that way. One British PR firm Hemeti hired stated, just 7 months after the June 3rd massacre, the media tends to focus on the past, when his role in the current and future is more important. We should therefore seek to rebalance the perception of the military to neutral to positive. The past being mass murder, and not like some old dodgy tweets. Very few international powers actually want democracy to take hold in Sudan. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Russia and their allies know that a military regime would suit their interests. They want to keep resources flowing out of Sudan. They want bases in Sudan. And they definitely don't want an example of people overthrowing an authoritarian government. The question for them isn't how to stop civilian suffering, it's whether they prefer an SAF.
Yeah, this is also a good point. Here are the names of the Israel/UAE-backed groups in Gaza. Counterterrorism Strike Force, Shujaiya Popular Defense Force, the New Gaza, and the Popular Forces. Popular Forces being the one with the, I mean, all of them I think have different AI emblems and logos, but they're all popular forces. They all present themselves like anti-Islamists. It's always the same shit. Open Presence, thank you for the 25, get the subs. The Arab identity in Sudan is extremely complicated. I've seen some articles refer to the Janjaweed versus others. To be more accurate, as old tribal feuds of nomadic versus sedentary tribes stoked purposely by the previous president through his use of the Janjaweed/RSF against those they had tensions with. Yeah. I don't know how to describe the it's not just a marketing technique though. This anti-Arab and this anti-black and Arab supremacist ideology is deeply ingrained in the RSF dating back to the Janjaweed. Of course, there is more than sectarianism, but this formation came into existence via ethnic disputes between the pastoralist Arab communities and the non-Arab ethnic groups in Darfur. It evolved into a genuine exterminationist ideology. Yes, for the Americans in the chat saying, how is it anti-black when they're both black, dude? You keep trying to fit Western labels on this very complicated conflict. Please stop. But the RSF seems to believe that they have some semblance of ethnic supremacy over the people that they're slaughtering. It's one of those things where it's not a real distinction, especially considering that these groups used to also cohabitate the same spaces and live alongside one another. And that from the outsider's opinion, it's like virtually impossible to discern. But then again, if you squint hard enough at like the Palestinians that are being slaughtered and the Israelis doing the slaughtering, if you didn't see the gear that they were wearing, you would probably have a very hard time figuring out who's actually on the side of Israel and who's actually resisting against Israel as well. That's why I always just say, like, in a lineup, if you put like Israelis and Palestinians side by side, no disrespect to the Palestinians here, but like if you look at it from afar, it's very hard to decipher. And this is normal. This happens all the time. Turks and Armenians, Turks and the Greeks, English and the French. Not really a good example. No, it is a good example. It's the same shit. Turks versus Kurds. All men are brothers is what I'm saying. And a lot of the racialized animus is like a post-chattel slavery holdover. People used to enslave one another with regular frequency, but under chattel slavery, there needed to be a difference, a different justification, especially because the people that were being enslaved were coming from different religious backgrounds, whether they be Muslim or whether they be Christian as well in certain instances. So they had to find a different language to justify the domination. And so they came up with skin color and race science. That's why it's like unique when we talk about the racial component here between people who are self-described Arabs versus the black Sudanese population. Yeah. If you're black, you were finished. The ethnically targeted violence raging in Sudan. Refugees tell of attacks on darker skinned people and non-Arab groups by rapid support forces allies in Darfur. Chattel slavery is ancient and it's not racial. What? No. It absolutely is racial. Your knowledge on this is poor. I think you are comparing other forms of slavery to chattel slavery. But chattel slavery is absolutely racialized, and it is seen as the modern, like what you understand as racism in the modern world, anti-blackness in particular, is different than different formations of race, different formations of slavery, which was predominantly built around ethnic conflict or domination of different sorts. This is like pre-nation states, right? Tribal conflicts. And there's a reason why a Roman slave versus a slave in ancient Greece versus a slave in the Ottoman Empire versus indentured servitude that the Irish were forced into. These are very different formations as opposed to the genetic component that exists within chattel slavery. Sometimes it was over conflict. You take over an area by force and you sell people into slavery, but it was never like, there's been many different formations of it, but chattel slavery was the one that was so domineering and traced back to genetics. Slavery has been around since human beings have been around, but it was never racialized to the degree that it was under chattel slavery. And there was a very specific purpose for it. Yes, it was generational. There was no way of like buying your freedom. There was no like educational component or upward social mobility, even within the slave class structure. It was not considered to be like a political status. This is the reason why historians will say chattel slavery is like a uniquely evil form of slavery as opposed to all other forms of slavery. This isn't to say that other forms of slavery were good, obviously, but it's just that chattel slavery is uniquely evil. And a big part of the reason why it's uniquely evil is because of the permanency of it and also the racial component that comes along with it. Romans had chattel slavery, but it was not permanent. Oh my God, chattel is literally cattle. Prisoners of war were chattel. Okay, you are describing what I am saying. You're engaging in a semantics argument with me, saying that what's new is the conflation of the caste with chattel that arose in America. This is a semantics argument that you're engaging in, where you're saying that the caste system applied to chattel slavery was unique. But when I say chattel slavery, everybody understands I'm talking about the transatlantic slave trade, like the enslavement of Africans. Okay, that's what most people understand. And the racialized component that I'm talking about came along with that so that there was a justification for the permanence of this slave structure and the forced reproduction of people that were treated as, once again, cattle with no way out. You understand the distinction between the Roman version of slavery, and you're saying that Roman version of slavery was also chattel slavery, even though you understand that the main point I was making wasn't even about chattel slavery. I'm using that as the common understanding that every single person has in terms of chattel slavery. Okay, and it is a modern version. The word slave is also super racist against Slavs. You are saying it's new. What's new is the combo of caste and chattel. Yes, but you are using it wrong. Oh my God. The reason why I was also bringing up the pseudoscientific construct of race in the way that we understand it, blackness in the way that we understand it, and race realism or race science that was, debunked, was in an effort to justify the permanence of the enslavement of African peoples by way of their race. I think this is the point you made, but the racialization of slavery in the West actually began after the import of African slaves. It was used as justification for the enslavement of an entire population as a way to get around the requirements that you could not enslave a Christian. Yes, that is what I said. And that chatter knows I'm right, but he had to be annoying and try to engage me in a semantics argument. It's like saying barbarin is a hateful terminology deployed against Germanic tribes or some shit. You know what I mean? How dare you use the ancient slur barbaric? Anyway.
AF or an RSF military dictatorship. The war has devastated Sudan. The imperative now is to stop the fighting, deliver much needed aid and medicine, and end the ethnic cleansing in Darfur. Millions are starving. Millions have lost their homes. The RSF is carrying out a genocide. The SAF is indiscriminately bombing civilians from the air, while trying to maintain al-Bashir's old regime. Hemeti is the creation of decades of policies of Sudan's rulers in Khartoum. He has weaponized the marginalization and impoverishment of Darfur and placed it right at the center of Sudan's future. This is a war waged by two generals, a ruling class, and foreign powers against civilians in order to control the country's wealth, and innocent people are the ones paying the price. Sudan is an example of a nation caught up in the machinations of larger powers. It shows how complex our world is and how hidden factors can play a massive role in shaping people's lives. If you're as fascinated by these kinds of global dynamics as I am, you need to check out the Logistics of X series by Wendover Productions, exclusively available over on Nebula, an independent streaming service owned by creators like me, and it's packed with the best documentaries online. One standout episode of the Logistics series was the Logistics of Arms Manufacturing, a deep dive into how the United States maintains its position as the largest producer of weapons in the world. through the use of complex, interdependent and sometimes hidden networks that transform raw materials into lethal munitions. The series also covers...
Anyway, all of the regional actors are backing one force over the other, or both at the same time, to different degrees. Russia being a regional, I guess if you want to call it a regional actor, one that arms and funds both sides. All right. Hassan Reaction is one of the best ones in the React channel.